Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Film Music, a very short introduction, by Kathryn Kalinak, narrated by Amy Rubinate.
Preface. Film music can be defined as music either directly composed or expressly chosen to accompany motion pictures. As a practice, it is as old as cinema itself. The very first projected images in many places around the globe either captured a musical performance or was accompanied by one. Even in those places where accompaniment did not initially attend motion pictures, it would soon do so. Film music has been both live and recorded, both newly composed and compiled from existing sources, both meticulously orchestrated and produced spontaneously through improvisation. It does not operate in exactly the same way across time, across cultures, and sometimes even within cultures. Across the board, however, it is characterized by its power to define meaning and to express emotion. Film music guides our response to the images and connects us to them. This very short introduction aims to provide a lucid, accessible, and engaging overview of film music from the pragmatic, what it does and how it works, to the theoretical, why it works, and from the historical, film music as a practice across time, to the personal, how film music has been practiced by the individuals who have created it. Although there will be many references to film music as music, this book is not a specialized study of music, and readers need no prior musical training. I am guided by the need to introduce film music through a global perspective. Although the United States and Western Europe were the first places where film and music were experienced together, the story does not end there. When films first came to Japan, was there musical accompaniment? What kind of music was first heard in accompaniment to films in India or Iran or Brazil? How did synchronized film scores transform the film industry in India, in Egypt, in China? How have political events around the world, World War II, the Russian Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, and the Islamic Revolution, impacted film composers and the practice of their craft? Answering these questions and others like them has been among my highest priorities. Film music scholarship has developed over the last 25 years into a formidable body of knowledge on the subject, but its blind spot has been nothing less than most of the world. As this is but a very short introduction and the world is a very big place, I have had to make choices about what to include. I have tried to focus on the major film industries around the world, but even this endeavor has been limited by the lack of information about film music in some of the world's largest film industries. The choices have been difficult, and I apologize in advance for the oversights on my part. The situation is much the same with my viewing selections. At the end of the book, there are suggestions for further reading and viewing. I have chosen to limit viewing selections to what is currently available on DVD, the common currency of the moment. It is dismaying to discover how many films I cannot include because they are not available in this format. The situation is especially dire when it comes to silent films with their original scores. Nevertheless, it is my hope that this very small volume will spark a very big interest in the global practice of film music. For the sake of readability, I have followed the practice of the Oxford History of World Cinema with respect to foreign film titles and names. Where an English translation or transliteration of a foreign title is available, I have used it, with the exception of films that are distinctly known by their foreign titles. Filmmakers are referred to by the names they are known by in the West. This has resulted in some inconsistencies, especially in terms of Chinese-language filmmakers. John Woo, for example, with the family name last, but Wong Kar-wai with the family name first. I apologize in advance for the many inconsistencies produced by grappling with the world's many languages through the prism of only one of them. Chapter 1. What does film music do? What does film music do? Since many in the audience do not even hear it, what good is it? I'd like to begin to answer these questions by looking at film music in action, by analyzing how music operates in a sequence I hope will be familiar to most readers, the torture sequence from Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, 1992, which features the song, Stuck in the Middle with You. Film music, whether it is a pop song, an improvised accompaniment, or an originally composed cue, can do a variety of things. It can establish setting, specifying a particular time and place. It can fashion a mood and create atmosphere. It can call attention to elements on-screen or off-screen, thus clarifying matters of plot and narrative progression. It can reinforce or foreshadow narrative developments and contribute to the way we respond to them. It can elucidate characters' motivations and help us to know what they are thinking. It can contribute to the creation of emotions, sometimes only dimly realized in the images, both for characters to emote and for audiences to feel. Film music can unify a series of images that might seem disconnected on their own and impart a rhythm to their unfolding. While it is doing all of this, film music encourages our absorption into the film by distracting us from its technological basis. Its constitution as a series of two-dimensional, larger-than-life, sometimes black and white and sometimes silent images. Of course, film music doesn't do all of these things all of the time, but music is so useful to film because it can do so much simultaneously. A multi-purpose musical cue. Take the song Stuck in the Middle with You, heard blasting from an on-screen radio, accompanying the torture of a uniformed cop at the mercy of a psychotic criminal, Mr. Blonde. A bubblegum hit of the 1970s recorded by Steeler's Wheel and aimed at the teen and preteen market, the song by conventional measures is no more memorable than any other catchy tune of that era. But in Reservoir Dogs, it demonstrates how music can be a controlling force in determining how we respond to a film. One of film music's primary functions is to create mood, an important component in how an audience responds. A torture sequence would seemingly create considerable tension in an audience forced to watch it. What is so interesting about Stuck in the Middle with You is its power both to alter that expected mood and to distance us from the violence. The very elements that make the song sound innocuous, its chirpy melody, conventional rhythms, banal lyrics, and predictable and uncomplicated harmonies, belie the grisly nature of the sequence, dissipating the tension inherent in the situation and replacing it with an uncomfortable irony. The music is, in fact, so powerful in creating mood that when Mr. Blonde momentarily walks outside the warehouse where the torture is taking place, and the song drops out, the mood is dramatically altered. Tarantino is certainly not the first nor the last director to pair brutal images with frothy music for ironic effect. Stanley Kubrick pioneered the practice in A Clockwork Orange, 1971, where Singin' in the Rain accompanied a graphic murder. In fact, it has become so commonplace to accompany violence with light-hearted music that the New York Times titled its 1994 commentary on the practice, "It's got a nice beat, you can torture to it." The pairing of brutality with bubbly music in Reservoir Dogs remains amazingly effective nonetheless. Songs, when the audience recognizes them, can be a particularly effective way of generating a specific atmosphere. Remember that we've been told what we need to know about the song by Mr. Blonde. Ever listen to K. Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s? And the DJ who introduces it as a Dylan-esque pop bubblegum favorite. Few of us might remember the 1970s, but if we do, a certain set of associations are activated. The vapidness of the me generation, its superficiality, its apathy. For audience members who can recall these associations, the banality of the song is heightened, and the irony produced by the unsettling mixture of the trite and the terrifying is intensified. The song begins, "Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. I got the feeling that something ain't right." The first stanza then moves in the next lines to the near rhyme chair and stairs, placing these everyday objects in the context of such anxiety-causing verbs as scare and fall. The rhyme scheme breaks down even further as the stanza ends with the memorable lines, "Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, here I am, stuck in the middle with you." The lyrics, and they are heard here by both the audience and the characters, add yet another dimension. Present in the sequence is Mr. Orange, a wounded undercover police officer posing as a member of the criminal gang, incapacitated by a life-threatening wound, but still alive and armed. Although present, Mr. Orange is not the focal point of the narrative, and we see him only in the background of a few shots. It is interesting how the lyrics of the song beckon us to pay attention to him. Indeed, something ain't right, as Mr. Orange finds himself stuck in the middle. Now the song no longer seems merely an ironic juxtaposition to the images. The lyrics have enriched our understanding of the narrative by directing our attention to a complicating factor in the scene, Mr. Orange's moral dilemma. Does he blow his cover and save the cop, or sacrifice the cop for the sake of the sting operation and the apprehension of the entire gang? Tarantino has pointed out that the audience is stuck, too. You are stuck there, and the cinema isn't going to help you out. Every minute for that cop is a minute for you. Stuck in the Middle with You guides our responses by creating mood. Its lyrics direct our attention to Mr. Orange, while they simultaneously provide a wry commentary on our own position as spectators. But this song has much more to tell us. Film music can also provide insight into character psychology. Remember that it is Mr. Blonde himself who turns on the radio for chirpy accompaniment to his grisly torture, and then begins to dance. I would argue that music renders Mr. Blonde's psychotic sadism more viscerally, and thus more effectively than the dialogue. Mr. Blonde describes torturing a cop as amusing, but it is the music that drives home his psychopathology. Further, film music shapes our very perception. Visual representation can be vague and unspecific. Are Mr. Blonde's facial expressions, for instance, really encoding sadism? Or is it perhaps insanity? Or maybe it's just a blank stare? Film has developed an arsenal of weapons for controlling narrative connotation, including acting, dialogue cues, expressive configurations of mise-en-scène and cinematography, and specific editing patterns. Music, however, remains among the most reliable of them. It is the music, its ebullience and joyfulness, in conjunction with the grisly torture, that helps us to interpret the facial expression of Mr. Blonde as sadistic. Film music can also create and resonate emotion between the screen and the audience. When we recognize an emotion attributed to characters or events, we become more invested in them. In a sense, the film feels more immediate, more real. Music is one of the most powerful emotional prompts in film, encouraging us to empathize with on-screen characters. What is so interesting about this particular sequence is how music complicates emotional empathy. The song undercuts the emotions that would conventionally connect us to the tortured cop, and instead promotes an emotional connection to the psychopath. What's more, the infectious joy of the song, with its visceral rhythms and catchy melody, has made the sequence, well, enjoyable. Says Tarantino, "You hear that guitar strain, you get into it. You're tapping your toe and you're enjoying Michael Madsen, Mr. Blonde, doing his dance, and then, boom, it's too late. You're a co-conspirator." It's all guilty fun until the sequence becomes so violent that it isn't so enjoyable anymore. Music promotes our pleasure in the violence. To say that our emotions are conflicted is an understatement. Music plays a part, perhaps the primary part, in creating this conflict, and then making us feel guilty for it, contributing substantially to the much-vaunted, cool psychodynamic of the film. Stuck in the Middle with You also helps to unify the sequence. By using a piece of music to structure the sequence, Tarantino gives it a logic and coherence that it might not have had otherwise. Certainly the music is instrumental in setting up the boundaries of the sequence. But the song's rhythms also dictate the editing, foregrounding the music. The song gives the sequence its lyricism, if that's the right word for such a sequence, its infectious energy that draws us into it, absorbing us into filmic spectacle. The role of the music supervisor. The score for Reservoir Dogs is different from a traditional film score, where a composer creates original music. For Reservoir Dogs, musical selections were culled from a variety of pre-existing sources, an approach known as a compilation score. It is generally the job of the music supervisor to make these selections and clear copyright for them. Usually, the music supervisor works to realize the vision of the director. But some directors have taken control of the process, choosing the musical selections themselves. Tarantino is a case in point, but there are many others, including Woody Allen, Wong Kar-wai, and Pedro Almodovar. Wong Kar-wai has described the choice of music as among the first and most determining decisions he makes in pre-production. For Chungking Express, 1994, he did not yet have a script when he described the project to his cinematographer by playing the Mamas and the Papas' California Dreamin', a song that plays a key role in the film. Tarantino's compilation scores are noted for their eclecticism and informed by a vast knowledge of music and film music. Kill Bill 1 and 2, 2003-2004, for instance, contains Nancy Sinatra's cover of Sonny and Cher's Bang Bang, songs by Isaac Hayes, Tomoyasu Hote, Charlie Feathers, Al Hirt, Quincy Jones, Meiko Kaji, and cues from Ennio Morricone's score for Death Rides a Horse, 1968, Bernard Herrmann's for Twisted Nerve, 1968, and Quincy Jones's for the television series Ironsides. Interestingly, the job of music supervisor has opened up an economic space for women in film music. Although Elizabeth Firestone and Dan Rennell found some work in the studio era, Shirley Walker scored a number of blockbusters in the 1990s and 2000s, and Rachel Portman is thriving. Female composers have found access to Hollywood film scoring limited. Women, however, now dominate the ranks of music supervisors in Hollywood. Film music's many functions. Film music shapes meaning on a number of levels. Audiences will respond to film music with varying degrees of awareness, but at least some of the operation of film music takes place on a less than fully conscious plane. I discuss this particular aspect of film music in much greater detail in Chapter 3, but here I would point out that when film music operates under the radar of consciousness, it has intensified power to affect us. Film music can cause us to engage with meanings and pull us toward responses without our knowing it, such as getting us to enjoy a scene of torture. There is one facet of Stuck in the Middle with You that the majority of the audience may not have apprehended on a fully conscious level. While most of the audience will be aware of the presence of the song, and many will register that this is a song from the 1970s and pay attention to its lyrics, and some may be cognizant of the irony and emotional turmoil produced by the song, few will realize that the volume of music has been manipulated. Stuck in the Middle with You could not possibly conform to the way it is seen to be generated on screen. Mr. Blonde turns on the radio, at which point the song is introduced. Initially, it sounds as if Stuck in the Middle with You is coming over the airwaves in monophonic sound, preceded by crackling transmission noises consistent with the dated radio and its limited sound capacity. However, on the cut to the close-up of the anguished cop, quickly followed by the long shot of Mr. Blonde beginning to dance, the volume on the song has been turned up, way up, and the quality of the sound improves from the thin monophonic sound of the radio to a fully stereophonic rendition. The music has been manipulated to intensify its joyfulness, and that we are not conscious of this manipulation increases our enjoyment. The manipulation of volume makes it easier to deal with Mr. Blonde, and thus sets us up for the complicated responses we have to the sequence. Stuck in the Middle with You has performed a variety of functions here. It has created mood, helped to establish atmosphere, aided in characterization, helped to shape the narrative, fashioned a complicated emotional response for the audience, especially in terms of the representation of violence, unified the sequence, given it its rhythm, and absorbed the audience into the spectacle of the film. And it has forced us to identify with a sadistic criminal. These observations about the function of music in narrative film are not unique to Reservoir Dogs. I've chosen this example because it demonstrates so many of the key properties of film music. This is not to say that film music is a kind of universal language. Music in Hollywood film operates quite differently from the way it does in Hindi cinema, which uses music differently than Bengali cinema does, which uses music again differently than the way it is used in Brazilian cinema. Specific national and cultural traditions have created distinct practices of film music throughout the world, and those specific histories have evolved across time, as we shall see. Even so, music has had an expressive power that crosses many borders, and film traditions throughout the world have harnessed music's expressive power to shape perception of the film and to reverberate emotion between the spectator and the screen. Chapter 2. How does film music work? Film music lies at the intersection of film and music, an obvious enough observation. But probing this intersection fully is crucial to understanding how film music operates. Film music inherits part of its ability to make meaning from its constitution as a musical practice, and another part from its constitution as a cinematic practice. Although it is often recorded or performed, marketed, and heard purely as music, film music is nevertheless defined by its function within a cinematic field of reference. Thus, music and film is always something of a hybrid. In this chapter, I introduce some of the basic ways in which film music can be meaningful, first in terms of its constitution as music, and second in terms of its function as a component of filmic narrative. Film music as a musical practice. This book is not intended as a specialized study of music, and it requires no musical training on the part of its readers. But film music is, after all, music, and like any meaning system, it depends upon certain forms and structures, and the patterns of meaning contained in them to make it intelligible. Just as we learn to read a film, that is, to connect specific meanings to the various techniques at the filmmaker's disposal, such as an editing dissolve, which tells us that time has passed, so too can we learn to read music. That is, to identify the basic building blocks of music, such as tonality, melody, harmony, rhythm, tempo, dynamics, timbre, instrumentation, and form, at the disposal of the composer, and connect specific meanings to them. If this process seems more intimidating for music than for film, it may be that our more extended acquaintance with visual media has made reading images seem easier. But remember that we had to learn to read films, too. Although music is universal, all human cultures that have left records appear to have produced it, music is by no means a universal language shared among all people across time. Throughout human history, music has been constituted in a myriad of ways. The music of the Western world, as it coalesced around a set of principles in the early modern period, is but one of them. It provides a useful entry point into understanding film music, however, for a variety of reasons. Western music exerted a powerful influence globally in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, at the very moment when film music was developing. Thus, it played a large part in the history of musical accompaniment around the world. And it is the musical system with which most English-speaking readers will be familiar. As I present this material, however, I will try to include examples from non-Western musics, which I hope will function as a contrapuntal voice, as well as a reminder that Western music is only one kind of music among many worldwide. The basic building blocks of Western music hinge upon tonality, a structure for organizing musical sounds into music. Tonality may be defined as a musical system revolving around a single tone or note, which functions as a center of gravity. It is a focal point around which the rest of the notes are organized, and which serves as the place where a piece of music begins and ends. Other systems of music employ tonality. Classical Indian music, and many kinds of Middle Eastern music, for example, depend upon a single tone, droned throughout an entire piece to provide a stable tonal base. Western music works in a different way, producing tension and release as the music moves alternatively away from and toward a tonal center. Tonality can be subdivided in a number of ways, but one important division is the one between major and minor tonalities, two organizing modes that can carry specific associations and can impart very distinct inflections. While there is nothing inherently happy or sad about music composed in a major or minor mode, associations of happiness and brightness are often attached to the major mode, while associations of melancholy and ominousness are attached to the minor. A distinguishing characteristic of tonal music, since about the middle of the 18th century, is the privileging of melody, a series of notes played in a memorable and recognizable order. Melody provides an access point into music, a hook on which to hang listeners' attention. Western music is not alone in utilizing melody. Classical Indian music, for instance, is built on melodies that have coalesced over centuries into a body of recognizable and commonly shared ragas, each with a unique melodic pattern and a fixed association, such as tranquility, heroism, power, or pathos. Thus, film composers in India, both in the traditional background score and in film songs, can easily access powerful musical structures for creating mood and atmosphere through the use of ragas. Film composers around the globe have engaged melody. A.R. Rahman, the Indian composer of the songs and score for Slumdog Millionaire, 2008, credits melody with a very important role in my sensibility in music. Melody, however, has been a hallmark of Hollywood scoring. John Barry explains, I love working with melody. I think if you can capture something in the simplest way possible, which is what melody is, then you're halfway there. Claims Randy Newman, I believe in melody. Maybe there are places where you don't want it, but I don't know where they'd be. Melody has often taken the form of a leitmotif, an identifiable and recurring musical pattern. A leitmotif can consist of any kind of musical material, a distinctive rhythm, for instance, but Hollywood composers have tended to construct leitmotifs through melody, either as short as a motif of a few notes or as extended as a theme. Leitmotifs can be developed and varied throughout the score, or repeated verbatim, reinforcing associations and becoming more and more powerful as a film progresses. The final reiteration of a leitmotif, especially when it coincides with the end of a film, can have an enormous emotional impact. Still, not all Hollywood composers privilege melody. Just try humming the shower sequence from Bernard Herrmann's score for Psycho, 1960. But melody is nonetheless a powerful tool for shaping a score. Harmony has to do with the coordination of notes playing simultaneously. In Western tonal music, harmony privileges certain combinations of notes or chords over others, creating stress points built upon dissonance and resolutions that dissipate dissonance. The farther harmony moves from the tonal center, the more associations of disorder and instability will be activated. The closer to the tonal center, the more associations of order and stability. Harmony is often less immediately recognizable than melody, but its effects are powerful and discernible, even by those without the language to describe them. Interestingly, harmony is not a requirement of music, and many musical practices throughout history and around the globe are not harmonic in the way that Western tonal music is. Musical systems that depend upon improvisation, such as Indian and Middle Eastern, lack a focus on harmony in the Western sense, and early music from many places around the globe, including the West, do not depend upon it. And the set of 7 tones or notes that comprise Western music's harmonic system represents only one such organizational structure. The pentatonic scale, used in many Asian and Native American musics, uses 5 tones. Western music harnesses the ability of tonal harmony to powerfully and predictably create and dissipate tension. Rhythm refers to the organization of music through time. Its basic unit is the beat, a discernible pulse that marks out the passage of time. Western music is characterized by a high degree of regularity in terms of rhythm, and deviations from established patterns can be very potent. Many music systems throughout the world depend upon rhythms, although they may operate differently than in Western music. In Indian music, musical rhythms have coalesced into established patterns far more complicated than Western rhythms. In Western music, a rhythm can be established in as few as 3 or 4 beats. One traditional Indian rhythmic pattern comprises 108 separate beats before it repeats. Middle Eastern song practice, on the other hand, often does not depend upon regular rhythms, but on flexible rhythms that can adjust to the lyrics. In Western tonal music, rhythm is much more predictable, operating as a sonic grid against which the composer rides. Timbre refers to the quality of sound that distinguishes one instrument or voice from another. To hear timbre in action, we might think of the difference in Western music between art music and popular music traditions. Art music aims to produce a fairly standard timbre within a vocal range or class of instruments, which can make it difficult to distinguish one operatic soprano from another. Popular music, however, aims in the opposite direction, to distinguish one voice from another, one way of playing an instrument from another. Establishing a unique timbre is one way of doing so, and most listeners can probably tell the difference between Mariah Carey and Pink.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?